What happened in that bedroom changed everything about trust. She thought it was just advice, harmless bedroom tips from her boyfriend of 3 years, the kind of thing couples share when they're comfortable, when trust runs deep. But at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, scrolling through his unlocked laptop while he showered, Maya discovered that every single tip he'd given her had come from somewhere else. And the source made her blood run cold. Maya Chen had always prided herself on being observant. As a user experience designer, she made a living noticing details other people missed. The way someone's eyes tracked across a screen, the micro hesitations before clicking a button, the patterns that revealed truth beneath the surface. Which made it so much worse that she'd missed this. 3 years. 3 years of what she thought was intimate knowledge, shared vulnerabilities, the kind of connection you build brick by brick. Derek was different from her previous relationships. Attentive, curious, always asking questions about what made her feel good, what worked, what didn't. She thought it was maturity. She thought it was love. The laptop incident was pure accident. Derek's MacBook sat open on she'd been thinking of it as theirs for 6 months now, kitchen counter. He'd jumped in the shower after his evening run, and she had been waiting for an email about a client presentation. Her phone was dead, charging in the bedroom. "Just check your email real quick," he'd called from the bathroom. "Password's still your birthday." The fact that he trusted her with his password had always felt significant, like proof, like evidence that she wasn't crazy for moving this fast, for already imagining their future together. She opened Chrome. That's when she noticed the tabs. Derek was meticulous about closing tabs. It was one of his things. He'd rant about people who kept 40 tabs open, how it showed a chaotic mind, a lack of discipline. Maya had exactly 3 tabs open on her laptop at any given time. Derek usually had 0. But now there were 7. The email tab was easy to find. She clicked it, scanned for her client's name, found nothing. She was about to close the laptop when her designer's eye caught something. The tab titles. They were all similar, all from the same website. Reddit. She felt ridiculous even as her finger moved toward the first tab. This was nothing. He was allowed to browse Reddit. Everyone browses Reddit. But something about the titles made her pause. How to make her think you're naturally attentive. Field report. Her stomach did something complicated. She clicked. The post was 8 months old. The username was Strategy First 31. Not Derek Chen's usual Derek Chen designs he used everywhere else. But the writing style, God, the writing style was unmistakably his. The same rhythm, the same M-dashes he overused, the same way he structured sentences. Month 6 update. The bedroom tip strategy is working better than expected. Key insight. Women respond more to the fact that you're asking and adjusting than to the actual techniques. It's the metagame that matters. She thinks I'm incredibly attentive. Reality, I'm just following a script I refined on the last 2. Maya's hands had gone numb. She clicked the 2nd tab, then the 3rd, then the 4th. Each one was worse than the last. There was a whole subreddit, a community, thousands of men documenting their relationship strategies like they were playing chess. The language was clinical, detached, horrifyingly methodical. They called it relationship optimization. They called women targets and subjects. They shared detailed breakdowns of emotional manipulation techniques disguised as intimacy. And Derek, Strategy First 31, was a top contributor. She found his first post, dated 4 years ago, right after his previous relationship ended. Field relationship autopsy. Got too complacent, stopped tracking emotional patterns. She left for someone more attentive. Lesson learned. Next relationship will be different. Going to document the whole thing. Hypothesis? If you systematically implement the top 20 intimacy building techniques while maintaining emotional distance, you can create the appearance of a perfect relationship while maintaining complete control. The next relationship. That was her. She was the experiment. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the laptop. The shower was still running. She had maybe 3 minutes before he came out. Her brain was screaming at her to close everything, to pretend she never saw this, to protect herself from knowing. She kept reading. There were spreadsheets. Actual spreadsheets embedded in the posts. Derek had tracked everything. Her emotional responses, what made her cry, what made her feel close to him, which spontaneous gestures got the best reactions. He'd color-coded them. Green for highly effective, yellow for moderate response, red for abandoned technique. The bedroom tips she'd thought were his natural intuition, listed in a post titled Month 3 Physical Intimacy Protocol Results. Techniques borrowed from previous relationships and online research, presented as questions about her preferences. Result: he believes I'm uniquely attentive to her needs. Reality: standard playbook, customized delivery. Note: the key is making her feel like she's teaching you. Creates bonding through perceived vulnerability on your part. There was a comment thread beneath that post. Dozens of men congratulating him, asking for more details, sharing their own field reports. One comment made her vision blur. Bro, you're a legend. My girl thinks I'm a mind reader now. Question: how do you keep from actually catching feelings? Month 8 here, and I'm worried I'm getting too invested. Derek's response: stay focused on the data. The moment you stop seeing it as a system, you lose objectivity. I keep a separate journal of things that annoy me about her, grounds me when the dopamine hits too hard. Remember, you're running an experiment, not living a romance novel. The shower stopped. Maya had 15 seconds, maybe 20, before he walked into the kitchen. Her mind was moving too fast and too slow at the same time. Every moment of their relationship was refracting through this new lens, shattering into something unrecognizable. The morning he'd brought her coffee in bed, scripted. The time he'd remembered her mom's birthday without a reminder, tracked in a spreadsheet. The night he'd held her while she cried about losing a client and said all the right things, probably lifted from a Reddit comment about emotional support protocols. She heard the bathroom door open. Did you find your email? Derek's voice, casual and warm, drifted from the hallway. Maya's fingers moved on autopilot. She closed all the tabs except the email one, closed the laptop, picked up her phone from where it sat on the counter, still plugged in, not dead at all. Yeah, she heard herself say. Her voice sounded normal, distant, but normal. All good. He walked into the kitchen, hair wet, wearing the gray sweatpants she'd always loved on him. Except now she was wondering if he'd read somewhere that women found gray sweatpants attractive, if he'd cataloged her reaction the first time he wore them, if there was a spreadsheet cell somewhere marked gray sweatpants, highly effective. You okay? He tilted his head in that concerned way she'd always found endearing. Now it looked like a programmed response. You look pale. This was it. This was the moment where she could confront him, where she could throw the laptop open and demand answers, where she could scream about the violation and the lies and the 3 years of her life she had given to someone running a sociological experiment. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the designer in her, the part that needed to understand the full scope of a problem before proposing solutions. Maybe it was self-preservation, some animal instinct that recognized she was living with someone who'd spent 3 years treating her like a research subject. Or maybe it was something darker, a need to flip the script, to run her own experiment, to see how far this went. "Just tired," she said, and watched his face carefully. "Long day." He moved closer, his hand reaching for her shoulder in that comforting gesture he always did. She let him touch her, observed her own revulsion like she was watching someone else's life. "Want to talk about it?" The concern in his voice sounded real. It probably even was real on some level. That was the horrifying part. He might actually believe he cared. "Not really. I think I just need sleep." "Okay." He kissed her forehead. She didn't flinch. Points for her. "Want me to make you tea first? That chamomile one you like?" Month 14, she thought. Chamomile tea protocol. Probably marked green in his spreadsheet. "That would be nice," she said. He smiled, squeezed her shoulder, moved toward the kitchen cabinet. She watched him prepare the tea with the same careful attention he brought to everything. Every movement precise, every gesture calculated. And that's when Maya Chen made a decision that would change everything. She was going to beat him at his own game. The next 3 days were the most exhausting performance of Maya's life. She went to work, smiled at Derek over breakfast, responded to his texts with the same enthusiasm she always had. At night, she let him hold her, let him implement whatever new technique he'd probably read about that week. And every moment he was gone, she read. The subreddit was called r/relationship strategy. Innocuous enough that it didn't trip content filters, specific enough that only people looking for it would find it. The description claimed it was about optimizing relationship outcomes through systematic analysis. What it actually was, a community of men treating relationships like competitive sports, sharing detailed playbooks on emotional manipulation, celebrating their ability to make women fall in love while remaining emotionally detached themselves. Derek had over 200 posts spanning 4 years. Maya read every single one. She learned that his spontaneous decision to take her to Santa Fe for her birthday had been planned 3 months in advance, based on a post titled High Impact Romantic Gestures ROI Analysis. She learned that the night he'd cried in front of her about his father's death, the night she'd thought they'd truly broken through to deep intimacy, had been deliberate, a strategic vulnerability display recommended for month 7 to deepen emotional investment. She learned that he maintained separate Google Docs for each relationship phase, with detailed protocols for different scenarios, conflict resolution scripts, apology templates, conversation redirection techniques for when she asked questions that got too close to truth. But the worst part, the part that made her physically ill, was the timeline. Derek had already decided when their relationship would end. The post was buried in his history, dated 3 months ago. Strategic update, month 33. Approaching optimal exit window. Target has deep emotional investment. Relationship has provided extensive data for refinement of long-term protocols. Planning engagement for month 36. Will boost her investment to maximum before executing fade strategy around month 42-45. Reasoning. Want to test long-term maintenance requirements, but commitment beyond 4 years enters diminishing returns territory. Will use career opportunity in another city exit strategy, clean, believable, maintains positive closure for both parties. Comments below congratulated him on his forward thinking and clean execution plan. Someone asked, "What if you actually want to marry her by then?" Derek's response, "Unlikely. The entire point is maintaining objectivity. If I found myself wanting marriage, it would mean I'd failed the experiment. The goal is to prove you can create perfect relationship conditions without losing yourself to the narrative." Maya sat in her car in the parking garage of her office building, reading this on her phone at lunch, and felt something break loose inside her chest. Not her heart. That was still there, still beating, still stubbornly insisting that some part of the last 3 years had been real. What broke was something else. Some fundamental assumption about how the world worked, about the basic social contract between people who claimed to love each other. She called in sick for the afternoon, drove to a coffee shop 3 neighborhoods over where Derek would never go, opened her laptop, and started making her own documentation. If he wanted data, she'd give him data. Maya Chen spent the next 2 weeks becoming someone she didn't recognize. Every conversation with Derek became a calculated performance. Every smile, every laugh, every moment of apparent intimacy, she tracked it all in her own private spreadsheet. She color-coded his techniques as she recognized them. She cross-referenced his Reddit posts with his real-life actions. And she built a predictive model of his behavior patterns. And then she started testing variables. She changed one small thing, her response to his spontaneous gestures, her emotional availability during deep conversations, and watch how he adjusted. She confirmed what his post suggested. He wasn't actually responding to her as a person. He was responding to deviations from expected patterns, then consulting his internal playbook to course correct. It was like watching a very sophisticated chatbot pretending to be human. But here's what Derek hadn't accounted for in his careful documentation. Maya was better at systems analysis than he was. It was literally her job. She found patterns he didn't know he was making. She identified the gaps between his Reddit persona and his real-life execution. And she found his weakness. For all his talk about maintaining emotional distance, Derek's posts showed increasing anxiety about one thing: losing control of the narrative. He couldn't handle unpredictability. Every time Maya had done something genuinely spontaneous in their relationship, quit her job to freelance, cut her hair short without asking his opinion, planned a surprise trip, his posts showed elevated stress. Target made unilateral decision re-career change. Concerning. Suggests independent decision-making framework that doesn't include my input. Will need to reassert influence. That's what he'd written when she went freelance. At the time, he'd been nothing but supportive to her face. Behind the scenes, he'd been strategizing how to reassert influence. Maya smiled at her laptop screen in the coffee shop, and it wasn't a nice smile. She knew exactly how to break his system. The plan took shape over the next week. Maya wasn't interested in simple revenge, keying his car, exposing him on social media, any of the obvious routes. That wouldn't touch him. Men like Derek, men who treated relationships like chess matches, they expected dramatic emotional responses. They had protocols for handling irrational female behavior. She needed to do something he couldn't predict. Something that would shatter his sense of control so completely he'd never be able to rebuild it. She started with small anomalies, responses that were slightly off script, but not obviously wrong. During their regular Tuesday movie night, when he asked the standard, "How was your day?" she gave an answer that was detailed but completely unverifiable. A story about a client interaction that never happened, decorated with emotional beats designed to trigger his supportive partner protocol. He performed exactly as predicted. Supportive words, comforting touch, follow-up questions at appropriate intervals. She watched him like a scientist watching a lab rat run a maze. Then she checked his Reddit that night. Sure enough, new post. Interesting development. Target displayed unusual emotional pattern today. Possible stress from work. Implemented standard support protocol. Response positive but felt slightly off. Will monitor for pattern changes. Perfect. He'd noticed the deviation, but couldn't identify what was wrong. His system was sophisticated, but it relied on genuine emotional data to function. Feed it artificial data, and it started glitching. Over the next week, Maya carefully introduced more anomalies. She cried at unexpected moments. She laughed at things that weren't funny. She initiated intimacy at times that broke their usual pattern. She asked deep questions about his childhood that seemed to come from nowhere. Each time, Derek adapted, consulted his internal playbook, adjusted his responses, tried to get the relationship back on track. And each time, his Reddit post showed increasing confusion. Target behavior becoming unpredictable, standard protocols less effective, multiple unusual emotional displays this week, hypothesis, external stressor I'm not aware of, will attempt deeper investigation. He was losing control, and he knew it, but he couldn't figure out why. That's when Maya implemented Phase 2. On a Saturday morning, Maya waited until Derek left for his weekly basketball game. Then she opened his laptop. She knew his password now, had watched him type it enough times, and did something very specific. She didn't touch his Reddit account, didn't leave any evidence she'd been there. Instead, she created a new Google Doc in his account, titled it Relationship Analysis Maya, and filled it with her own fabricated data. But here's the genius part. She made it look like Derek had been having genuine feelings all along. She wrote entries dated throughout their relationship, entries that contradicted everything on his Reddit, entries that showed him struggling with real emotions, questioning the experiment, falling in love despite his intentions. Month 8. I'm losing objectivity. Can't stop thinking about her. This wasn't supposed to happen. The data is supposed to keep me grounded, but I'm looking at her sleep-talking about her presentation, and I feel something I can't name. Fuck. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Month 15. Told myself I'd end this at month 18. Can't do it. She's not an experiment anymore. Don't know when that changed. Can't post this on Reddit. They'd say I failed. Maybe I did. Don't care. Month 24. Bought a ring today. Going to propose at month 36 like I planned, but for completely different reasons than I originally documented. How do I tell her about the Reddit? Do I have to? Can we just build from here? Terrified of losing her. Entry after entry, perfectly matching his writing style, but telling a completely different story. The story of a man who started an experiment and accidentally fell in love for real. Then she shared the document with herself from his account, made it look like he'd sent it to her accidentally, left everything open on his laptop, and waited. Derek came home from basketball at 2 p.m. Maya was on the couch, his laptop open in front of her, tears streaming down her face. Real tears. Because somewhere in the process of fabricating a version of Derek who actually loved her, she'd felt the full weight of mourning for something that had never existed. Maya? His voice had that careful quality she now recognized as threat assessment. What's wrong? She looked up at him and let him see everything. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, but mixed with something he wouldn't expect. Hope. You shared a document with me, she said, voice shaking. I don't think you meant to, but Derek, I read it. All of it. She watched his face cycle through confusion, then panic as he realized what she was talking about, then horror as he assumed she meant the Reddit. He moved toward the laptop and she saw the exact moment he registered that it wasn't Reddit on the screen, it was the Google Doc. The fake Google Doc, full of fake feelings she'd written in his voice. His face did something complicated. He looked at the screen, then at her, then back at the screen. She could see his mind racing, trying to figure out what this was, how it fit into his framework. I started, then stopped. For maybe the first time in 3 years, Derek didn't have a scripted response ready. You were running an experiment, Maya said, her voice soft. I understand that now. The Reddit posts, the strategies, all of it. But Derek, you fell in love anyway. You wrote it all down, trying to understand what was happening to you, how the variables changed, how I became real to you instead of a target. She watched him process this, watched him trying to figure out if this was really his document, if he'd somehow written these entries and forgotten them, if he'd been lying to himself on Reddit while telling himself the truth somewhere else. The confusion on his face was the most genuine emotion she'd ever seen from him. You don't have to say anything, she continued, standing up, moving toward him. I just need to know, is this real, what you wrote here? Because if it is, she let her voice break. If you really feel this way, then we can work with it. We can build something real from here, together. She was offering him an out, a beautiful, perfect out from his own experiment, a way to preserve the relationship while completely reframing the narrative. All he had to do was claim those fake entries as his own, admit to feelings he'd never actually had, and step into the story of a man who'd accidentally fallen in love. For a long moment, Derek just stared at the screen. And then, slowly, he smiled. Yeah, Derek said, and his voice was different now. Softer, more uncertain, more human than she'd ever heard it. Yeah, that's real. I'm sorry I never told you. I didn't know how. Maya felt something twist in her chest. Not satisfaction, not even anger anymore. Just a deep, exhausting sadness. Because she'd given him a perfect escape route from his own sociopathy, and he'd taken it without hesitation. He was so committed to maintaining control of the narrative that he'd claim feelings he never had, rather than face the truth of what he'd done. I understand, she said quietly. And she did. She understood everything now. She moved closer, wrapped her arms around him, felt him relax into the embrace. He thought he'd won, thought he'd successfully navigated the crisis, adapted to new data, maintained the relationship through yet another unexpected variable. He had no idea he was hugging a stranger. I love you, Maya whispered against his shoulder, and watched him process how to respond to this variable. Watched him consult his internal database of appropriate reactions. I love you too, he said, and probably even believed it in that moment, because men like Derek didn't lie exactly. They'd just redefine truth until it served their purposes. She pulled back, looked into his eyes, and smiled. I need some time to process all of this. It's a lot to take in. The posts, the analysis, then finding out you actually fell in love anyway. It's overwhelming. Of course, Derek said immediately, slipping into comforting partner mode. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. That was the first honest thing he'd said. He really wasn't going anywhere. Not until month 42, at least. Not until his predetermined exit window. Though he'd probably adjust that now, given this new development. Actually, Maya said slowly, like the thought was just occurring to her, maybe I should stay at Rachel's for a few days. Give us both some space to think about what this means. For us. For the future. She watched him calculate. Watched him weigh the variables. Too much resistance would seem controlling. Too little would seem like he didn't care. He'd need to hit the exact right note of reluctant acceptance. If that's what you need. But Maya, this doesn't change anything between us. We're going to be okay. She nodded. Let him kiss her forehead. Let him help her pack a bag. Let him perform concerned boyfriend right up until she walked out the door. And then she got in her car, drove 3 blocks, parked, and started laughing. It was not a happy sound. Maya didn't go to Rachel's. She went to a hotel downtown, one with a business center and excellent Wi-Fi. She ordered room service, opened her laptop, and began the final phase. She'd already prepared everything. Screenshots of Derek's Reddit posts, carefully annotated. The fake Google Doc she'd created with metadata showing it was made a week ago, not years ago. Her own documentation of his behavior patterns cross-referenced with his online claims. A complete psychological profile of a man who'd spent 4 years treating relationship partners as experimental subjects. But she wasn't going to post it. Wasn't going to expose him publicly. That was the expected move, the one he'd probably have a protocol for. Instead, she did something much simpler. She sent it all to a therapist. Not any therapist. His therapist. The one he'd been seeing weekly for 2 years. The one he'd told Maya was helping him work through career stress and family issues. She'd found the therapist's name months ago, back when she still trusted Derek, when she'd picked up his phone to check the time and seen a calendar reminder, Dr. Sarah Chen, weekly session. She'd thought it was sweet that he was prioritizing his mental health. Now she wondered what lies he'd been telling there, too. The email to Dr. Chen was brief. I'm Derek's partner of 3 years. He doesn't know I'm sending this. I recently discovered extensive documentation of what he describes as a relationship experiment he's been running on me. I'm attaching evidence of this behavior, including his own words from online forums where he discusses his strategies. I understand you may not be able to respond due to confidentiality, but I felt ethically obligated to provide you with information that might be relevant to his treatment. If he's been lying to you too, you deserve to know. If he's been honest about this with you, then I suppose that makes you complicit. She hit send before she could second guess it. Then she composed a second email, this one to Derek. I know about the Reddit. I know about the spreadsheets, the protocols, the exit strategy planned for month 42. I know everything. The Google Doc I found on your laptop, I wrote it. Every word. I wanted to see if you'd claim feelings you never had just to maintain control of the narrative. You did. That tells me everything I need to know about who you actually are. I've sent documentation of everything to your therapist. I'm not interested in revenge or exposure. I just want you to face one person you can't manipulate with a script. Good luck. Don't contact me again. She scheduled it to send in 6 hours. By then, she'd be on a plane. Maya had already accepted a job offer she'd received 2 months ago, a position in Seattle she'd been planning to turn down because of Derek. She'd called them that morning and said yes. She had a lease signed on an apartment she'd never seen, just toured virtually. Her entire life could fit in the boxes she'd quietly packed and shipped to her mom's house over the past week, labeled storage items. She'd designed her exit the way she designed user experiences, with careful attention to every possible variable, every potential friction point, every moment where the system might break down. Derek had taught her that, in his way. How to see relationships as systems, how to plan for contingencies, how to protect yourself while playing a role. She just happened to be better at it than he was. The email sent at 11:47 p.m., exactly the same time she'd first discovered his Reddit, a detail she knew would unsettle him, and Maya's phone immediately exploded with calls and texts. She had expected that. She was already in the air, phone in airplane mode, drinking overpriced wine, and staring out at darkness. She didn't know what would happen next, whether Dr. Chen would confront Derek, whether she'd dismiss the email as a vindictive ex-girlfriend's revenge fantasy, whether Derek's carefully constructed therapeutic narrative would survive contact with evidence of who he really was. She didn't know if Derek would try to find her, if he'd post about this on his subreddit, if he'd somehow turn even this into data for his next experiment. What she did know, she was done being part of anyone's system except her own. The woman in the seat next to her was reading a romance novel, one of those beach reads with a shirtless man on the cover and a title promising forever kind of love. Maya almost laughed. She'd been living in her own version of a romance novel for 3 years, except the genre had been wrong the whole time. She'd thought it was a love story. It was actually a psychological thriller. Good book? Maya asked, surprising herself. The woman looked up, smiled. Terrible, actually. But sometimes you just need to believe in the fantasy, you know? Yeah, I know. She'd believed in the fantasy, had invested 3 years in a fiction she'd helped Derek write without realizing she was the only one who thought it was real. Every shared laugh, every vulnerable moment, every time she'd felt truly seen and understood, all of it had been a performance so good she'd mistaken it for truth. The worst part wasn't that Derek had fooled her. The worst part was that she'd fooled herself. Every red flag she'd ignored, every gut feeling she'd rationalized away, every moment of doubt she'd buried under the weight of wanting to believe she'd finally found something real. That was the lesson worth learning. Not that some people are manipulative, that was obvious, but that you could be intelligent, observant, professionally trained to notice patterns and still miss the truth when it was wearing the face you wanted to see. Maya landed in Seattle at 6 a.m. to 17 missed calls from Derek and a voicemail that started with, "I can explain," and devolved into something between rage and panic. She deleted it without finishing. There was also an email from Dr. Chen, sent at 2 a.m. "Miss Chen, I can't discuss Derek's treatment, but I want you to know I received your email and take such concerns seriously. I hope you're somewhere safe. Please take care of yourself. What you did took courage." That was it. Professional, boundaried, but somehow the most validating response Maya could have had imagined. Someone believed her. Someone took it seriously. That mattered more than she'd expected. Her new apartment was small, mostly unfurnished, with a view of the Space Needle partially obscured by another building. It was perfect. It was hers. It had no memories of Derek, no ghosts of conversations that had never been real, No traces of the person she'd been when she thought being loved was the same as being studied. She spent the first week in Seattle walking. She walked to her new office, walked through Pike Place Market, walked along the waterfront until her feet ached. She was relearning how to exist in her own body, how to have thoughts and feelings that weren't being monitored and analyzed and fed into someone else's decision-making algorithm. It was harder than she had expected. Derek had been her reference point for so long that without him, she felt untethered. What did she actually like? What did she actually want? Which parts of herself had been genuine and which had been performances designed to fit into his system? She went on exactly one date in those first few weeks, a guy from work who seemed nice enough, who asked her to coffee with obvious nervousness that felt refreshingly real. They talked about their jobs, their favorite books, the weird adjustment of moving to a new city. Halfway through, he said something that made her laugh. Really laugh. The kind of unself-conscious burst of joy she hadn't felt in months. And then, immediately, her brain started analyzing it. What made that funny? What pattern was I responding to? Is this genuine, or am I just... She stopped herself, took a breath, let the moment be what it was without dissecting it. "You okay?" the guy asked. His name was James, she reminded herself. Pay attention to that. Remember his name. "Yeah, just learning how to be present again." He nodded, like that made sense, and didn't push for explanation. They finished their coffee. He asked if she'd want to do it again sometime. She said maybe, which was honest. He smiled and said that was good enough. It was such a normal interaction, such a beautifully, perfectly mundane moment of two people trying to figure out if they might like each other. No spreadsheets, no protocols, just uncertainty and possibility and the risk of actually being seen. Maya walked home thinking about trust, about how Derek had tried to optimize it, systematize it, treat it like a variable he could control. But trust wasn't a feature you could engineer. It was what emerged in the spaces between control, in the moments when you chose to be vulnerable without a backup plan. She'd given Derek her trust completely, and he'd treated it like experimental data. That was the betrayal. Not that he'd hidden things. Everyone hides things. But that he'd weaponized her openness, turned her vulnerability into a research project, made her love into a game he was winning. 3 months into Seattle, Maya got a DM on Instagram from a username she didn't recognize. No profile picture, no posts. Account created that day. She almost deleted it without reading. But something made her click. "I'm sorry. That's not enough, and I know it. But I need you to know I'm sorry. Dr. Chen told me I've been diagnosed with something called vulnerable narcissism. She says I've been treating relationships as a defense mechanism against actual intimacy. She says I need intensive therapy and probably shouldn't be in a relationship for a long time. She's right. I wanted to tell you I've deleted the Reddit account, deleted all the documentation. I'm trying to figure out who I am without the system. It's terrifying. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you didn't imagine it. There was something deeply wrong with what I did. You deserved real love, and I gave you a simulation. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I hope Seattle is everything you wanted. I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve, without spreadsheets, without protocols, without conditions. You were right about everything. D." Maya read it 3 times, analyzed it for signs of manipulation, for hooks designed to pull her back into conversation, for anything that felt like another play in a longer game. It read like an apology. A real one, the kind that doesn't ask for anything back. She sat with her phone for a long time, watching the cursor blink in the reply field. She could respond, Could tell him she appreciated the message, wish him well, offer some kind of closure for both of them. Or she could do what her therapist, her new therapist, the one Derek would never know about, had suggested. Honor the boundary she'd set by not responding at all. Let the apology exist as his gift to give, not her obligation to acknowledge. In the end, she just deleted the message. Not out of anger, she was surprised to find the anger had mostly faded, leaving behind something more like sadness for both of them. But because engaging, even to forgive, would still be centering Derek in her narrative. And she was done with that. She was writing her own story now. A year later, Maya was leading a design workshop when someone asked her about building trust in user experiences. Trust, she said, pulling up a slide, isn't something you can engineer through clever design patterns. You can create conditions that make trust more likely, transparency, consistency, respect for user agency, but actual trust, that's what happens when a system consistently chooses the user's well-being over its own optimization metrics. She paused, thinking about Derek, about his beautiful system that optimized for everything except genuine connection. The moment you start treating people as variables to manipulate, she continued, you've stopped building trust. You've started building a very sophisticated trap. And here's the thing about traps. They work really well right up until the moment your user realizes what you've done. Then you've lost not just their trust, but their willingness to ever trust that category of experience again. The workshop participants nodded, taking notes. They thought she was talking about apps and websites. She was, but she was also talking about something else entirely. After the session, a woman approached her, mid-30s, competent, the kind of competence that came from surviving something difficult. That bit about systems choosing optimization over well-being, she said, that really resonated. I just got out of a relationship where I was definitely being treated as a variable. She laughed, but it had an edge. Your talk made me realize I need to trust my own instincts more. Stop ignoring the red flags just because someone's good at explaining them away. Maya felt something click into place. This was why the story mattered. Not her story specifically, but the pattern, the warning, the permission to trust yourself even when someone's gaslighting you into believing you're paranoid. You know what helped me, Maya said? Realizing that love shouldn't feel like you're constantly trying to solve a puzzle. Real connection is sometimes messy and uncertain, but it doesn't feel like a test you might fail. The woman's eyes got bright. Thank you. I needed to hear that. They exchanged contact information. Maybe they'd be friends. Maybe they'd just be two people who crossed paths at the right moment. Either way, it felt like something full circle, taking her pain and transforming it into something useful. Not for Derek, not as revenge, but as a kind of map for anyone else navigating similar territory. That night, Maya updated her own journal, not a spreadsheet, just free-form thoughts she'd been keeping since Seattle. She wrote about the workshop, about the woman who had approached her, about the strange alchemy of turning trauma into wisdom. And then she wrote, I think I'm ready to try dating again. Not because I've moved on or healed completely. I'm not sure those are real destinations. But because I'm finally curious again about connection, and I trust myself to recognize the difference between someone who sees me and someone who's studying me. She paused, then added, also, if I ever catch myself making a spreadsheet about a relationship, someone please stage an intervention. Maya went on dates. Some good, some awkward, all refreshingly normal. She learned to notice green flags, actual ones, not the fake vulnerability displays Derek had performed. She learned what it felt like when someone was genuinely curious about her versus when they were mining for data points. She learned that real intimacy was actually kind of boring compared to Derek's carefully orchestrated romance. There were no grand gestures timed for maximum emotional impact. Just gradual disclosure, building inside jokes, slowly deciding to trust someone with progressively more tender parts of yourself. It was quieter, less dramatic, infinitely more real. 6 months into casually seeing James, the coffee shop guy who'd somehow stuck around, he asked her something that stopped her cold. Do you ever worry that I'm too normal? Like, after what you went through, maybe you expect relationships to be more, I don't know, intense? They were making dinner in her apartment, which had slowly filled with furniture and plants and evidence of a life being lived. She looked at him standing there in her kitchen, sauce-spoon in hand, asking a genuinely vulnerable question with no apparent agenda behind it. You want to know what's intense? Maya said. Trusting that when you say something, you actually mean it. That when you're actually upset about the thing you say you're upset about. That you're not running calculations in your head about how this moment fits into some larger strategy. She moved closer. James, you're not too normal. You're just real. And that's so much better than intense. He smiled, clearly relieved. Good, 'cause I have no game. What you see is pretty much what you get. Perfect, she said, and meant it. That night, after James went home, Maya opened her laptop and found herself on Reddit. Not looking for Derek's posts, she'd learned those had actually been deleted along with his entire account, but browsing r/relationship strategy, reading the new posts from men who were still playing the game. She felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger at the casual cruelty, at grown men treating women like NPCs in a video game they were trying to beat. Sadness for all the partners who were being experimented on without knowledge or consent, but also something like hope, because some of the posts were from men who'd found the subreddit and were calling it out, arguing with this strategic approach, sharing their own stories of trying to build real relationships instead of optimal ones. The culture was shifting. Slowly. Not fast enough, but moving. Maya closed her laptop and looked around her apartment. Her space, her life, her hard-won peace. She thought about the bedroom tips that had started everything, those carefully researched techniques Derek had presented as natural intuition. She thought about all the nights she'd felt so seen, so understood, so perfectly matched with someone who was just following a script. And she thought about what trust actually meant now. Not the naive trust she had before, the assumption that people were who they claimed to be, but something more complicated. Trust with eyes open. Trust that included the possibility of betrayal, but chose connection anyway. Trust that didn't require perfection, but did require honesty. Epilogue. 2 years after leaving, Maya got one more message from Derek. Not through social media this time, but through an old email address she had forgotten to delete. I got engaged. To my therapist, actually. Former therapist. Ethically speaking, we had to terminate treatment before we could date. I know that sounds like another strategy, another game. It's not. Sarah knows everything. The Reddit, the experiments, all of it. She's been helping me understand why I needed the system. Turns out, when you grow up feeling invisible, controlling how people perceive you feels like safety. Anyway, I'm not telling you this to get in touch or to prove I've changed. I'm telling you because you deserve to know that what you did, sending that email, forcing me into real therapy, it actually worked. You probably saved my life, or at least my capacity for a real one. I don't expect you to care, but I wanted you to know that the person you tried to destroy and the person you tried to save were both real, and the one you saved won. I hope you're happy. Genuinely, not strategically. Derek. Maya read it once, saved it in a folder she'd never look at again, and didn't respond. She wasn't interested in Derek's redemption arc. That was his story, not hers. Her story was about learning to trust herself, about building a life that felt real instead of optimized, about loving someone who loved her back without consulting a playbook. Her story was about the moment she found those Reddit tabs and made a choice. Not to ignore it, not to be a victim, but to play the game better than the person who'd invented it, and then to walk away and build something better than any game could ever be. The bedroom tips everyone should know? Here's the real one. If someone's approach to intimacy feels like a performance they've rehearsed, trust that feeling. Real connection is messy and uncertain and never perfectly optimized. And that's exactly what makes it worth having. Maya closed her laptop, grabbed her keys, and headed out to meet James. They were going rock climbing. Her idea, not his, something she'd never tried before and might be terrible at. No spreadsheet tracking her progress, no protocol for building romantic connection through shared novel experiences. Just two people trying something new together, with no idea how it would go. Perfect. If you saw the red flags Maya missed, if you felt the moment everything clicked into place, hit subscribe. More stories that'll make you trust your gut, coming soon.